In 2015, a headline flickered across national news.
Search crews are racing against the clock to find 3 men who went crabbing yesterday but didn't come back.
The Coast Guard is helping in those efforts, too. The boaters were reported missing in Camden County at around 8 last night.
For days, search crews scoured the marshes. Eventually, the story vanished. Another fishing boat tragedy.
It's every day people's lives in jeopardy out there, you know?
Here's what the headlines missed. Camden isn't just a dot on a map. It's a place where families turn swampy backwaters into a home and a legacy.
My name is Jessica Chung Tai. I'm 26 years old and I live on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. I originally grew up in Camden County, which is about an hour and a half inland from here. It's another small rural town that's on the water. I lived there until I was about 11 years old. I currently work as a real estate agent, and I also spend some time on the side bartending at a local rum distillery called Outer Banks Distilling. I live with my boyfriend, his name is Duran, and we have a dog. She's a yellow lab named Mari. Yeah, it's really good. I'm very grateful.
This is a story about water, how it carries people, sometimes fleeing wars, sometimes chasing dreams, how it shapes a culture. And it's a story about danger, not just storms or sinking boats, but the financial kind, making a living under complex circumstances. So let's take a moment to learn about a long-time North Carolina fishing community. It can be easy to miss.
Absolutely. Yeah. Camden County, more specifically where I grew up, it's called Camden Point, which is in Shiloh. And if you're familiar with Camden at all, you'll know it's past Old Trap. So it's pretty far back there, very swampy, very small town. The neighborhood that I grew up in, it was mainly a fishing village.
Yeah, it wasn't the sort of fishing town that often gets depicted, all clam chowder and taverns.
Almost all of our neighbors in the neighborhood I grew up in were Vietnamese people, the same as my family was. My American name is Jessica, and that is my real name. So my full name, on my birth certificate, is Jessica. My Vietnamese name is Trung. In Vietnamese, you would, if you were referring to me by full name, you would say Tai Trung.
Hey, this is Ren Smith, and this is Shoresides, where we tell stories about the North Carolina coast. We're diving into the family, a fishery, and a distinct North Carolina community. Let's start in 1983.
My dad and his mom, my grandma, and his sister and brother came to America in the early 80s. He says it's around 82 or 83. He's not exactly sure on the time frame, but they were actually refugees. They were escaping the communist government of Vietnam.
So if you're not familiar with the history, and I certainly wasn't, April 1975, Saigon falls. It's the end of the Vietnam War, and the communist government takes over. Some of those who either fear or protest it begin to leave however they can. By the 80s, the numbers are staggering. Over 1 million Vietnamese refugees, some fleeing on rickety boats. The United Nations estimates a third of them don't make it. Jessica's family luckily did.
They piled onto a boat and paid someone to help them escape, and they came over to the States. After spending a couple nights crammed onto that boat, an oil rigger found them and brought them to Hawaii.
Even after arriving safe and sound, though, things weren't easy.
There was not a lot of work for him in Hawaii. My granddad's original job when he lived in Vietnam, he was a fisherman. A lot of the native, Hawaiian people were very territorial about fishing, understandable. But he had a friend that lived here already in North Carolina that fished. And he said, hey, there's a lot of good opportunity here in Wanchese fishing on the trawler boats.
A trawler, and it's a floating factory. Picture a massive net dragging behind a ship, scooping up shrimp or fish.
So my grandpa packed up the family, and they came all the way over here to North Carolina. And my granddad fished on a trawler boat. I believe it was called the Miss Quality. And this was in like 1984.
Seems Jessica is right about the name. Little online research shows that this quality was captained by a guy named Bernie Foster.
But then my grandma, she was like, you know what? There's people that are crabbing in Camden. We can do this. So she bought a boat, and her and my granddad started their own crabbing business.
Camden County. It's a place so sparse it doesn't even have a single incorporated town, according to Coastal Review. Just the great dismal swamp looming over everything. A 100,000-acre tangle of water and myth.
They started with the one crabbing boat that she bought right after my dad graduated high school, and they decided they would start the business. Fast forward, eventually my grandparents had 2 boats and my dad had 3, and they had a crew of people that helped them. Every season, my dad said he would drop 1,000 pots, and as in 1,000 crab pots.
It was hard work, but also enough of a foundation to start a family.
My dad really wanted to get married, and something that is common in Vietnamese culture is arranged marriages. Even though my dad said he would never go back to visit Vietnam or go back to Vietnam for any reason due to communism, he did want to go back to get married. So he went back in 1995, and this always sounds crazy to me, but a week after meeting my mom, they decided that they would get married. Everything was arranged. They got married. And then about a year later was when my mom was able to come to the States. And then I was born in 1998. So my dad continued his crabbing business. And my mom, when she came over here, found work in the nail industry. I remember helping like wrap crabs, that the way they would pack them in these boxes and freeze them and stuff. The pots are what you put in the sound. It's attached to a buoy. And that's where like you put the bait and the crabs go in, and then you pull them up and you get the crabs out, right? My dad, he set the pots, so you put the crab pots in the water. They look like a cube with almost like netting, like wire with like holes. And there's like a little trap door that the crabs go in, and then they get stuck in there. And then he had his boats, and on the boat he had this, I don't know what it's called, but it's a machine that sits on the side of the boat, and you pick your buoy up, put it around the machine, it pulls up your pot for you, and then you would shake the crabs out and put them in the box. In the spring, when it was soft shell season, it was so busy because someone would have to be at the shutters, after the crabs lose their hard shells while they're still soft is when you pull them out. I remember we probably had about 60 or 70 shutters. They look like tables and they have water in them. And that's where the crabs are.
Jessica's childhood was a blend of experiences.
Another thing that I think about all the time and I tell people about all the time is being first generation and growing up in northeastern North Carolina. I had a very good balance of the Vietnamese food culture in my house and also good Southern cooking, because at home it was all Vietnamese food. My grandma, she lived with us, so she would just cook all these Vietnamese meals. I'm sure people have heard of like pho. It's a Vietnamese noodle soup. There's always rice. I remember growing up, there was always a pot of rice ready to go. Like if you just want a little snack, you could have some rice. A lot of fish too, and a lot of seafood. But crabs were definitely a big part of our diet. Like we had it all the time. But me being picky, of course, I was like, no, I don't want crabs. I want pizza or something, But now as an adult, I love crabs. I love soft shell crabs, hard crabs, any seafood really. Soft shell crab is it's a crab that it sounds just like what it's called. It sheds it's like the hard shell, and they're really delicious when you can fry them. Usually is how people would eat them. But the season I would say is like spring. Like I just had the first soft shell of the season for me personally last Friday. I just thought of something else. I remember like if I would bring my lunch to school or bring my lunch somewhere, or if there was a field trip or something, I would bring like, a rice and pork dish that's Vietnamese. And I remember the kids would be like, oh my gosh, like what is that? Like kids, they don't know. And sometimes kids are mean, or if they don't know what it is, they're like a little judgy. But I remember being like, oh, like this is normal to me. Like I'm eating this at home. I don't know why you think it's so crazy.
For Jessica's family, community was important.
I remember growing up, my parents helped other families that were wanting to immigrate to America. They said, hey, we can help you find a job. And then like my mom would have the wives, like go to school, get their license to do nails, and then she would give them a job in her nail salon. So it's definitely built on community. And I remember the neighborhood that we grew up in, it was very tight knit, and like we'd always have parties and cookouts and dinner, and everyone was just so nice and helpful. And there was one I remember, an American family, like I guess you'd say like a white family. I'm still friends with like some of the daughters on social media. They were amazing. And I just remember like going to their house and stuff. But community in that neighborhood was really, really big.
It's a community and tradition she still finds time to connect with.
I really love fishing. I got back into it when I started living on the beach, like living on the Outer Banks again. Just as an adult, fishing is really fun. Where I live, there's a lot of accessible spots that you can go to and fish. I live right on the bay, so I can throw my waders on, walk out there with my pole and cast a few times and catch a trout or something.
Yet, while Jessica might look back with nostalgia now, she also remembers that crabbing came with risk.
I actually remember reading about that article as well, about the 3 crabbers that died. So sad. Crabbing and really any fishing job can be really dangerous. I remember someone had drowned, I believe. Something happened to their boat while they were out, and like a storm came and they didn't make it back in. Another time, this one I remember really clearly. So we lived on a canal, and the door in our kitchen, you could see the canal. And then there was a house on the other side. They were a crabbing family as well, and they had their boats docked there. I remember my sister was like yelling. She was probably, I don't know, 4 or 5. And she was like yelling, and she's like, there's a fire, like there's a fire. And one of the boats across the canal at the other family's house was like engulfed in flames. There was a huge explosion because of the fuel tank or something. You know, the guy that was working on the boat, he got flung up in the air. But I think the guy did end up passing away. There's definitely dangerous aspects of it. Actually, my dad, he has a little bit of health issues with his eyes from where one time I think he got fuel in his eyes when he was working on his boat. You know, it's just, I mean, fishing, it's not an easy job. You're in the sun all day, out on the water all day, and it can be tough.
And it was tough work that Jessica's family eventually left behind.
The reason why my dad decided to sell his fishing business is because it was so hard for him to find help. He had a great crew of guys for a while, and it was just hard to keep them because a lot of these guys were Hispanic and they were also immigrants. And the Coast Guard was cracking down on paperwork, and maybe some people being immigrants and not having the right paperwork. And my parents wouldn't, they're like, we're not going to hire you or continue to let you work if you don't have the proper documentation. I think towards the end, that's ultimately why he could not keep running his business, because it was just hard to find help. And he did say that he tried to do it on his own a few times, but it was just too much, to run the boat and try and do all the work by himself.
Still, the legacy lingers, connecting Jessica to everything, even her boyfriend Duran.
There's some amazing connections there that I never would have thought would be, but here we are. And another really cool story. So I was sitting at my boyfriend's parents' house for Christmas last year. We were just all sitting under the house hanging out. And you know how people have buoys hung, like old buoys hung up as decorations? I feel like it's pretty common in like coastal. Yeah, so I'm looking at one of the buoys that his mom's got hung up underneath the house, and I'm thinking, wow, that's the same color that my dad would paint his buoys. My dad would paint his buoys from crabbing with a pine green color. My dad's favorite color is green. pine green, and he would engrave in them his first initial T and then our last name, Ty. And I'm looking at this old buoy and I'm like, that's the same shade of green as my dad's buoy. And then I take a closer look and it says our last name on it. And I'm standing there freaking out. Everyone's just hanging out. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I think this is one of my dad's old buoys. I took a picture of it and I sent it to my dad, and he was like, wow, that is like finding one of my long lost children. He's got all his little jokes, but it's just a full circle moment for me. It gives me chills when I talk about it. But yeah, it's just a full circle moment that connects us. So it's little pieces of my family's history and my family's journey here in North Carolina, just scattered all around.
Today, Camden's crabbers face new tides. Climate change, labor shortages, generational divides, but the legacy floats on.
I was on the phone with my dad the other day, and he was just kind of giving me a little refresher. I absolutely love hearing my dad's and my mom's stories, and my grandparents too. It's absolutely incredible what they've gone through to just come and have a better life here, and to have a better life for their family and their kids, and coming over here with no money, and they didn't know how to speak English, and coming to a place like Wanchese, North Carolina, or Camden, North Carolina. They really made it. Like, they really built a life for themselves here, and that is something that inspires me every day.
I'm Ryan Smith, and thanks for joining.
Thanks to Jessica, Ty, and the Ty family. To learn more about Shoresides, visit shoresides.org.